So I'm going to briefly introduce myself, sort of give you a background of how and why the topic of that we'll be talking about today um, is so important to me. We're then going to identify the problem that we're facing, and I'm sure some of you thinking the problems are seem massive. And but I want to put them in context for us so that we understand very clearly all of what seems to be chaotic, sort of put it in a framework that makes it a little easier to understand. And then we're going to talk about how do we move forward? How do we use these pending changes to make sure that we continue to properly prepare our teachers for the classroom? So I was actually, my husband and I both actually were provisionally licensed teachers. We were started our second career in 1993. I went on to earn my master's and PhD in special education. My first career was corrections. I worked in the prisons, offering counseling and things in the court systems in Connecticut. So the natural segue from that field was to go into a high school and work as a teacher. At the time, it was called behavioral emotional handicap. But of course, since then it's changed. Most of my career was spent in rural North Carolina school districts. I spent 26 years as a North Carolina K-12 school teacher. I now work as an assistant professor at Central Connecticut State University. And interestingly, when I arrived in 2022, the university's education program was undergoing significant changes where most of the students before I arrived were traditional graduate uh, teacher candidates, where they had earned the undergraduate degree and were earning the master's degree. But upon my arrival after COVID, most of our candidates, probably 90% of them now, are provisionally licensed. So the university sort of struggled with that change. When I arrived, because I was very familiar with the experience of being a provisionally licensed teacher, working in a classroom, not knowing what I was doing, but having to take courses and teach at the same time, it was triggering for me when I began. And so what I recognized was that things hadn't really changed when my husband and I started in 1993, and we were earning our graduate degree in education. One of the significant problems that we faced was at that time, and sadly, even now, these graduate programs are still functioning under the old school um, traditional framework where they're assuming that the teachers who come in and are earning the graduate degrees have an undergraduate degree in them. So much of what they're focusing on is theory based, assuming that the teachers have that foundational knowledge that they need. And so that's why I have that little boot camp over the little, boot camp picture there. And the reason behind this book was to say, wait a minute, we cannot afford in this climate to have teachers coming in and continuing to sign up to teach and have absolutely no training at all to go in. So the argument was, can we give them something that will help them navigate that first year? So let's go into identifying the problem. So I tried my best to condense the problem into just these three major areas. What we're looking at now is sort of what I would like to refer to as the domino effect. Uh, for those of you who've been in the field for any significant time, you know that teacher shortages have been ongoing for 20 years. I mean, we've been struggling to maintain the teaching staffing that we need for over 20 years. This peaked with COVID, which between the gradual decline of 20 years of teachers teacher shortages, and the spike in teachers abruptly leaving the field at um, at the time of COVID, we saw significant academic losses in our students. So significant that they've kind of been front page news. That has pretty much, those issues and others have pretty much been put in the lap of the Department of Education. And so the department is being sort of blamed for what was, an ongoing issue that we were facing in education, just to recruit and retain teachers. Right now, although there's a lot of litigation still going on, we're looking at $900 million in cuts to the Department of Education, which will trickle down to districts nationwide. And so again, while there is still some litigation, there are still areas that have been cut and will be cut. So that number may fluctuate a little bit, but at the end of the day, that's still a lot of money for school systems to lose. So, what are we looking at? When you look at where the cuts are occurring, you recognize very quickly that there's going to be a severe teacher shortage in urban and rural schools. And let me explain how that works. Now, this screen, the links here do, when you press them, they do give you access to um, the most up to date. As I said before, things are changing very quickly. And so, as of yesterday, the links that you have here will give you access to the most up to date information around the three divisions. So, when you look at the Department of Education, it functions like a three-legged stool. There's the research division, the funding division, and the civil rights division. We all know that the research division really keeps us up to date by collecting student data, assessment data, collecting it, analyzing it, and using it to inform decisions and policies, inform decisions in funding. So we really make so virtually all of our decisions based on research. That's not just higher ed or school districts, that's from the federal level all the way down. Our decisions are based on the research division. The funding sources that we have that we're facing the most losses in would be Title II funding. That is the one that is still in litigation. It looks like about $65 million loss in that particular division. It could be more, but that is right now, they're still in litigation around that. But essentially, the biggest cuts were to teacher recruiting, retention, and training. That's Title II, Part A. And so right now we had two major grant programs designed to go to really help fund teachers in rural and urban schools where most, I don't want to, let me take that back. I want to qualify that. Teachers aren't knocking down the doors to teach in rural schools and in urban schools. And so those grants were incentives to help teachers offset the cost for earning a license, a teaching license in education. So with that, those funds being cut off, that's going to create major issues for recruiting, retaining, and training teachers, especially in those specific areas. And the Civil Rights Division was basically saying, okay, whatever regulations come around, um, they're all about enforcing them. That department, I think, was cut in half. So all of the departments remain for the most part, but they have been just about cut in half. Now, to look a little more closely at the research division, when you're looking at research, depending on how often you go into this particular area, or really look at the research related to students, these particular areas, I think it's the National Center for Educational Statistics and the Institute for Educational Sciences. These institutions, as I said before, they collect, analyze, and disseminate data to inform policies, to inform innovation in teaching, and to fund teaching, and I'm sorry, to inform funding. And here you can see Title II, Title One, Part A. Now, this is funding that's supposed to go to low income schools to help them with basic operations. There's still a question about whether or not um, that will turn into block grants. And so there's not been any movement on that yet. But Title II, Part A, again, funding to recruit, retain, and train teachers for Title I schools specifically, that has been significantly cut. And so we're still waiting on Title One, Part A. For those of you who are wondering about IDEA, the most recent budget that passed did put aside or allocate money for IDEA, but did not create any line items. So they're really concerned about, if you set aside billions of dollars for it, but you don't tell people how to spend it, there's a chance that it could be spent any way that the school districts or, the states decide. Now, what does this mean for us? And by us, I mean definitely at the higher education, the level of higher education and school districts and school administration, where you're looking at professional development. When you're looking at severe teacher shortages beyond what we're already experiencing, and you couple that with non-traditional teacher candidates, like I was 32 years ago, one of the things that you're getting is, we're going into these graduate schools learning to become teachers. Unfortunately, the graduate school programs have not adjusted for this change. And so, for the most part, they're still focusing on theory, with the assumption that they're still teaching that that traditional student who has an undergraduate degree in the field, who is equipped with the basic foundational knowledge that they need to just be able to thrive in the classroom. And that can't be any further from the truth. Um, Again, not only am I a witness to this, as a professor for my students, but I too experienced this. I did not know it had not changed. Um, so what should we be doing? We need to focus on the fundamentals and supplement instruction by collaborating with parents. Now, right now, public schools are leaning really heavily on tiered supports. We have uh, evidence-based interventions and tier supports, where we have small group instruction and one-to-one instruction. Well, I'm sure you can imagine, when you reduce funding, that reduces your personnel. It reduces the number of people you have available to perform at these different tiers. And so the one group that, with the increase in school-wide interventions and tiered support systems, we've sort of inadvertently push parents away, because parents don't understand evidence-based interventions. So we haven't really relied on them the way we have in the past. So one of the things that we have to reconsider is, when you lose the funding that almost cripples your personnel and how many people you have available to carry out all of these tiered systems, you have to rely on what we do have, and that is parents who are willing to help. So I want to take this last few minutes to just kind of jump into how the text addresses some of the problems. For chapter one of the things that I focused on, that I struggled with, and I know most of my teachers even now struggle with, is the fundamentals of classroom management. Very quickly, one of the major issues is teachers don't even know that they need a classroom schedule. If you don't have a classroom schedule, then you don't have routines. And without routines, you don't have procedures, and you have problems with students being compliant with your rules. And so something as simple as a classroom schedule, teachers don't know, they don't have, and they're struggling with student non-compliance as a result. For chapter two, one of the things, I can't speak for other states, but I know in the state of Connecticut, they have done away with lesson planning. I don't know how you do that. I don't know how you tell someone they don't need a plan for instruction, but it is in fact true. Lesson plans have been done away with. I have seen lesson plans at the university level that are so, they can be, they're up to like 8, 10 pages of lesson planning. And when you have people who are new to the field, they just don't understand it. And they don't understand Common Core state standards, which many schools are no longer training on that. If they ever did, they're not anymore. So in the text, we take a moment to really explain what Common Core state standards are. We also focus on that parent teacher communication and collaboration, and helping teachers understand some of the best ways to collaborate with parents. Again, we cannot reach out to parents from the mindset that we have now, where we have been neck deep in interventions and tiered systems. We really have to, when we communicate with them, we have to communicate with them in ways that they understand. And so included in chapter 3 are ways that parents can help their children develop reading and math skills, speaking and listening skills at home, using um, activities that are familiar to them. And so this is just an example of something that is in the text where, for teachers who are saying, look, your child is struggling with math, they can say to the parent, well, look, if you generally cook with a simple recipe, here are ways you could use that recipe to help your child with reading. Here's a way that you can use a simple recipe to help your child with math. And these are the different sort of standards and domains that can be used. You can also use cooking with recipes to develop their social emotional learning. So it really helps educators understand when you need that extra support, when you need that child to have that extra support, and you don't have someone who's familiar with tiered systems and evidence-based processes, then you give them what they are familiar with. And these are some of the activities that parents do anyway. They're cooking anyway. The task becomes inviting their child into it for a very specific reason. Another issue that we need to deal with is, and that is dealt with in the text, is role clarity. They, because of the intervention systems put in place, general education teachers and special education teachers are really struggling to know where they fall, because when you're familiar with MTSS and the tiered support systems in general education, regular education teachers are required to provide some supports, and perform interventions in the class. Well, special education teachers obviously have to perform interventions as well, but theirs focus on children who have IEPs. And so for these two teachers, they feel like there's an overlap, and they're confused about where one role ends and where the other begins. And that's really something that we have to address when we're looking at the possibility of having severe teacher shortage. For chapter 5, teachers now are struggling, regular and special education teachers are really struggling to understand how educational initiatives like MTSS work, because depending on the school, depending on the staff, depending on the administration and turnover rate, the system may be fractured. And so they need help understanding, for those schools that will continue to use interventions and have those systems in place, they need to understand how it actually works. And that's something that is addressed in chapter 5. There's the one of the newer initiatives that we have, and probably one of the more controversial, was around social emotional learning. There were a considerable amount of teachers who left the field when they were forced to practice social emotional learning because they simply felt like it was more of a mental health issue and they were trained in academics. In the text, I provide a formula entitled HOPE. It's an acronym, but this formula really helps teachers understand how to take reading content in the form of a play, in the form of a poem, a fiction, a novel, and informative text. It shows you how to take that and use that content that you're already teaching to develop students' social emotional learning. For those of you who are old enough, we're simply looking back at Aesop's fables. It is a formula that says, look, although this is an actual fiction, although this is an actual novel, this is a text that you can use to look at the theme, look at what is the lesson that we can learn from the text. And so chapter 6 helps teachers understand if you have to teach reading anyway, take that as an opportunity through Q&A to develop students socially and emotionally. And finally, chapter 7, again, when you're looking at shortages, when you're looking at having to do more in less time because there's just not enough of you, time management is critical. Time management is critical now. We have teachers who are taking courses, they're teaching full time, but they can go to work one day and have several staff members out, and instead of teaching their class and having their planning time, they're having to cover classes, and so they don't know how, because they're not familiar enough with managing their own time anyway. When something like this happens, they don't know how to regroup and sort of get that time back, if you will. So these are the ways that the text specifically is addressing some of the issues that we're facing now. But based on what we're looking at, based on some of the changes, we can expect things to regrettably get a little worse before they get better. So, any questions?
Thank you so much. I have a few here already, and I
Okay.
encourage everybody to use the chat function to ask additional questions of Christina. Um, what examples of technology do you recommend for helping with the parent-teacher communication? Do you have any specific examples of apps or?
Yes, actually, in the text. Now, I'm not going to try to go from my memory right now, but one of the things that I include in the text is a set of activities where teachers go in and they uh, do the work of sort of investigating what is out there, and they have to rank them. There's Class Dojo, which based on my students' research, that seems to be the ideal one. There's Classly, starts with a K. But there are quite a few out there. What you want to decide before you select an app is, do you want one for that is free? um, and do you want one that has more bells and whistles? Dojo is the one that really has a lot of bells and whistles to it. If you're someone who's my age and you'd rather just pick up the phone or email, it probably wouldn't work well for you. But for those of you who love technology and you invite all of that in, Class Dojo, I think it's Class Dojo or just Dojo, Dojo, that teachers recommend.
That's great. Question, what were the titles of chapter 4 and chapter 5?
That is, well, I cannot close my screen right now. I do know chapter 4 is focused on role clarity where as it pertains to the special education teacher, and I really believe it just focuses on special education. The reason why is because, again, when we're looking at interventions, we have so much confusion around that. that I really wanted to focus on special education, focus on what educators do that is different from what regular education teachers do as it relates to MTSS. So we're talking about accommodations and modifications. We're talking about the use of evidence-based interventions, but specifically for our teachers. Chapter 5 is dealing with educational initiatives. I We have had so many changes and they've come so quickly, and regrettably, not all of them have been taught. So they've been announced and we've been expected to do it. So what I did for chapter 5 is really go into detail about what are these initiatives and how do they actually work. So that one deals with educational initiatives.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I got a couple of advice questions if you're up for that.
Yes.
Um, what advice would you have for seniors entering the educational job market at the moment?
When you say educational job market, what do you mean?
I guess entering the teaching
Ooh.
field. What
Um,
advice would you have for seniors in this uncertain time?
yes, I would say the most important thing that I would say is one, know why you're going into it because it's very challenging. As I said, I'm someone who has been in it for 32 years. I can't tell you how many people I've watched leave. In fact, in the text, in chapter 6, I'm explaining that I'm really giving you an idea of the reality of teaching, and because I want my students to answer the question, why do you really want to do it? Because having summers off is not it anymore. And so the advice that I would give is please, please, please understand your why, because you're going to need that on those difficult days. And the last piece of advice I would give is please know the fundamentals, because right now what we have is an influx of students coming in who lack basic self-regulation. They lack self-regulation. And so it's going to be up to you to be that person who understands how to do that. How do you teach someone else to be self-regulated? And then how do you partner with a parent to do that? Because the parents play a key role in doing that. So know your why and know the fundamentals of helping students learn to regulate themselves.
What would be your advice regarding recruitment and retention of undergraduate pre-service teachers in a more traditional 4-year university program? Would that be similar advice?
Well, it would be similar advice. I can tell you the struggle right now with a lot of our high school students when they're polled and they're asked if they would consider teaching, they're saying because of their own experiences, largely with standardized testing and the rigidness of the classroom, it has turned students who would otherwise enjoy doing it, it's turned them away. Their own experiences have turned them away. I would give them the same advice, know your why. But when it comes to recruiting, the sticky part is you're recruiting from a group who has kind of suffered under what changes we've made to the system. And not all of them have been really great. I'm sorry about that answer.
I know we're coming up on the bottom of the hour here, so I appreciate everyone's time. One additional question for you, Christina. How can school administrators be more effective in implementing these initiatives? Do you see administrators getting more involved in protecting funding and targeting funding?
One of the things that I have recognized with school administrators, and my husband was one of those, he went that route. The struggle that they're having is they're being pulled between the regulations around funding and operations and the academic research and the student behavior. So they're pulled in so many different directions that I don't think they understand that they too need a balance. Because if they don't fully understand, most of them understand the regulations around funding and the sort of the what they have to report to the districts. So that's their focus, which reduces their effectiveness when working with teachers because they're focused so much on the operations and unfortunately behavioral issues that they haven't been as effective at supporting teachers. And research is showing that teachers, especially in special education, are saying that's one of the reasons they're leaving. They're not getting that level of support that they need.
This is super helpful. Um, Time for one more question.
Sure.
All right. What do you think needs to be changed in our educational system to help teachers stay in the profession?
You know, as bad as things look right now in terms of the funding, in terms of the changes, I'm going to be honest to you. The one silver lining is that we get to go back to the basics. We have gone down a rabbit hole so deep with interventions and evidence-based practices until I'm not sure how many people know up from down anymore. And so for me, like I said, as bad as this looks, I'm grateful that we get to go back to a time where we could partner with parents. We have, like I said, inadvertently pushed parents away. And so parents don't even know how to help us anymore. This is also ongoing. Our oldest son is going to be 30 next month. And I remember vividly him being in elementary school and they were teaching some new strategy for math. I didn't understand it, but he didn't understand it. So as a parent, I was trying to help him, and we were told by the teacher that we couldn't, it was division, long division. I taught him good old fashioned long division my way, but he was told when he went back to school he couldn't do it that way. And so I had to email the teacher and say, okay, well, then you and I need to have a meeting so you can teach me the math so I can help him at home. Because right now, as a parent, I want to help him, but I don't know what you're doing. And so I think that problem has worsened over time. And so, like I said, as bad as it may look, the idea that as teachers, we can get back to the basics of instruction and bring parents back in so that they have a voice, I think that's ideal. I do.
This was wonderful. Thank you so much, Dr. Christian. I'm getting lots of positive feedback on your presentation and your text. So,
Awesome.
um, if you are interested in a copy, complimentary access to her publication, simply drop a note in the chat and we can get you access to that. Otherwise, I hope everyone has a great day. Any concluding thoughts, Christina?
No, but I did want to say thank you to Kendall Hunt Publishing for this opportunity and for everyone that joined and asked a question. I'm grateful for you. And let's just all, have positive thoughts as we move forward and just take one day at a time.
Thank you so much. I hope everyone has a great day. I'll send this recording out the next day or two.
Thank you.
Thank you.